Hey everyone, my name is Brian Howard. I'm a Calgary realtor who has sold an average of a house a week since moving to this great city in 2003. I'm interviewing Calgary's top performers as it relates to living and lifestyle in our great city. Some of the podcasts will be real estate decision specific, but most will be about life in Calgary and why we choose to live here, or at least why you should visit. Thanks for tuning in. In today's podcast, I'm interviewing Anne Marie Lurie. Anne Marie Lurie is our Chief Economic Forecaster for the Calgary Real Estate Board. She has a diverse background in real estate, which has enabled her to provide insight into the macroeconomic climate and factors impacting the Calgary real estate market. Currently in her role as Chief Economist at CREB, she's responsible for scoping, developing, and leading the board's economic analysis and market intelligence products. I hope you enjoyed today's podcast.
Well, we have Anne Marie on the line. Thanks, Anne Marie, for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
I've been following you and watching you, it feels like since about 2009. And so often when I'm meeting with my own clients, whether they're sellers or buyers, I'll often tell them about the stories that Anne Marie, is generally in charge of. And I'll use your name and I'll talk to them about what great forecaster at the Calgary Real Estate Board is sort of saying about the market. And then, depending on my optimism in Calgary real estate, I'll often say she's predicting often and in the right direction, but maybe she's a little off the percentage points is what I'll often say. What strikes you about living in Calgary? What most strikes you about living in Calgary?
Well, I mean, I'm from Calgary, so I was born in Calgary. I find this is a city that it has a lot to offer. So I think, being a Calgarian, obviously my roots are here. I mean, my family's here, everything that I quite enjoy about Calgary. But I mean, when we think about the city in itself, there's never been a reason really for me to leave. And I've looked at that as really there's always been opportunity in Calgary for me. Right from the time when I went through university on. I mean, I left a short while to Edmonton, but that's not very long. So, but that's really when I look at Calgary, it's just there's always been opportunity.
For myself, I came to Calgary in 2003 primarily for the schools for my kids was one of the big reasons, and the economy and the opportunity. So I moved here from the East Coast for the opportunity, and so there's where that question is coming from. And of course, since I've come to Calgary, the city has doubled in size. And I was reading most recently that it's 1.5. Is that true? Is there 1.5 million people in our city? Have you noticed?
That includes the broader range too. So that doesn't include just the city of Calgary. That will include the areas outside of it as well. So that would include like the Airdrie, the Okotoks, Cochrane, and the broader regions. So
very great.
Within the city itself, it's just over 1.2. So.
Oh, and that's what I was thinking, 1.2. Okay, and the broader outskirts, I suppose, that brings it up to 1.5. And what is it that you love most about Calgary? And what is it that you don't like about Calgary? Is there anything?
What I love most about it is the fact that you can have a really good lifestyle here compared to other cities. It's a place that I can still, I'm a person who loves my detached home and I have land around me. So, but you can still get that in a very relatively affordable way. So that is one thing I love about Calgary. You can still have a lifestyle of your choice. And, it is still very affordable compared to, if I wanted that same property in Vancouver or Toronto, it's not attainable for me. Right. So I think that's part of it. Obviously I love the proximity to the mountains and just what we have here, like just the space and I'm a fan that it's not overpopulated yet. So that's a benefit to me. Now, things that I miss is just some of the access to, some of those lifestyle things. You go into bigger cities, it's always vibrant, right? Like if you go into larger cities, there's always something going on. There's always things to do regardless of what time. And Calgary's not quite like that, but that just comes with its size. So.
Okay, interesting. Thank you. I'd like to talk to you a little bit of maybe here, or maybe, actually I'd like to maybe just address it a little bit. You talked about the affordability in Calgary, and then I'd like to maybe touch base on like our boom and bust cycles, and maybe we'll just sort of set that aside for a little bit. Would you mind telling me about your work with CREB, the Calgary Real Estate Board, maybe your interest in real estate, and how you ended up working as a forecaster for CREB, and how that might affect your own real estate decisions?
Well, there's a couple things. Okay, so I guess that's a lot of questions all in one.
Yes, sorry.
All right, so let's start with the first one again. Let's go in order.
Tell me about your work with CREB. Yeah.
So I've been, with CREB for, like I said, about 9 years now. How I kind of came about into this role, I've been doing real estate sort of analysis and assessment on many different levels. So I think I started off way back when in pension investments. So I actually was focusing more on the commercial market and helping investors like make decisions on, commercial properties. So that was really where I started in real estate. That was up in Edmonton after I graduated from university, and I didn't want to stay to Edmonton. So hence I moved back into Calgary. And at that time, I went to CMHC. So I've got really that experience on not just the analysis side of CMHC, but I also did underwriting on the commercial side, again, on more multifamily base. So, so I've kind of got that side of the market. And then, I moved on. I went to Colliers International for a few years. And then really, I had kids, and that kind of changed what I wanted in my life and how much I wanted to work. And, CREB was an excellent opportunity for me at that time, in that I get to still do the analysis and, the forecasting, which I love. I mean, that is my training. I went to school I've got both my undergraduate and my master's degree in economics. So it brought me more back to those roots versus just financial analysis. And I was able to do it in a city that I love. So, that was really what drew me to CREB. Now, in terms of how I've used it to my advantage, I guess, if I think about my own housing decisions, I mean, because I've been doing real estate for a lot of times, I mean, unfortunately, okay, so on the first basis, I mean, housing and your personal home is far more than just an investment decision. Okay, so my investment background would tell me, well, that, if I was just doing it for an investment decision, I probably would have made different choices than what I did. Okay, but I was purchasing a home for it's really for my family. So I had different criteria that goes beyond just what's my best return on investment. So. But what I did do is, I kind of had an ultimate goal of what type of property I was looking for. I'm an acreage owner. So
I knew that
I like
too.
Land. I like land. I like space. I don't like neighbors. So that was my ultimate goal. And I mean, I grew up on an acreage. So this is where that was something that I've always wanted. But, there was a period of time in the market where, some of those acreage prices got absolutely ridiculous. So I didn't think it was quite attainable for some time. When we purchased our first home, we ended up going with a new build, mostly because there was no supply in the resale market. And I was looking at the market at the time. It was before me and my husband were married, but I'm like, I'm moving now because I saw that there wasn't much supply, and I'm like, if we don't, we might miss we might miss this, right? So I actually got in fairly early, so before the previous boom. And then, really when we decided to upgrade, I waited for the last downturn, right? So when the market turned post-financial crisis, I saw that actually as an opportunity to get into our acreage. We had already had a significant appreciation on our first home. It provided that opportunity to get to really where I view it as my final property until I can't live there anymore. So that's kind of how we looked at the market. It was that opportunity to take advantage of the move-up market because the prices hadn't appreciated quite yet following the financial crisis. So we took advantage of that, and now we've been in that property for several years. And like I said, with no intention really of going anywhere anytime soon. So
great. So I just, in terms of dates there, previous boom and, post financial crisis, just, I would like to say, to prove how smart I am, I'm joking. So I'm guessing that you bought your property sometime between 2009 and 2012, probably maybe 2010 or 11 or. Am I right?
For the second property or the first one?
Yeah. So I was your first acreage. Maybe your first acreage is what I'm asking.
Yeah, my first acreage, we actually bought that in 2012. So.
2012. Oh, good for you. Okay. And,
Yeah,
I mean, I don't know if you want to share, but what about your second acreage? When did you buy that?
Oh, no, that was my first acreage. My first property wasn't an acreage. My first property was a home in the city.
Oh, okay.
And we actually purchased that back in 2003. So we actually held it for quite a long time. Yeah.
You've done really well with your real estate then.
Yes, I have.
So just for fun on that note, can you bring us back all the way, I'm talking like 2-3 minutes from, say, what happened say from 1996, where I think, we started to see increase to those. So when the boom happened, which I think of myself, and correct me if I'm wrong, is about December 2005. And then the bust of October 2008. Am I right on those kind of dates?
About so. I mean,
Yeah.
so the 90s was a period of there wasn't a lot of activity in Alberta. So it was actually a fairly slow period. We started to see the pickup in growth happen in that 2000 period. And really that came because there was all of a sudden, we saw new development in the oil sands industry and we saw growth in energy. And that encouraged so many people to move into this province. Like, I mean, if we think before that time frame, you talked about when you came, it was 700,000 people. Our city used to be quite small. So, I mean, if I think back, before that, I mean, it was a very small city. Like, I mean, I think of even when I was growing up as a child in Calgary, we grew up out by where the Simons Valley Ranch was. Well, the first road into the city was 64th Avenue. So it gives you some perspective of how much it grew on the north end. So,
right.
So that growth really came, significantly through the 2000 period. And we saw the significant spike in house prices really came in that 2000 and, as you said, 2005, 2006 period. And then we went through a financial crisis, and that's where things started to come down. We came out of that actually fairly well. So we did start to come out of that, and that was more in that 2000 and, we started to kind of level out and then come out around it in that 2011, 2012 period, we started to see improvements.
And would you think of, like, when I think here we are sitting at 2019 September, when you think back to 2013 and 14, you wouldn't call that a boom, but it was good times for real estate in our city, correct?
Absolutely, yeah. And I mean, we were, we have to put some perspective. We were also recovering from a financial crisis, and we were one of the few markets to be doing that. At the time, our energy sector was looking good. We didn't have a lot of supply. Prices were increasing at fairly higher rates, let's say. And so that's what we saw in 2014. And I mean, that was really fueled from, our strong energy sector. That supported a lot of employment growth, and, that really translated into people purchasing homes. So we saw that price growth happen up until 2014.
Mm-hmm. Did the change in 2015 surprise you, like as an economist, or?
Well, I mean, we didn't see, like, no one expected that the oil prices would come down as much as they did. Given the fact that it was persistent, I wasn't surprised. I think the initial sort of thought of when prices first came down in the second half of 2014 was, how long is this going to last? I mean, one thing about being a forecaster in real estate is, you're always kind of looking at like it's kind of the last thing to sort of change. Right. So when we saw that happen in 2014 with oil prices, at the time, most people who in the energy sector hadn't expected it to be as persistent as it was. So once as we hit that 2015 mark and we realized that this is really a significant change, then I wasn't too surprised to see that pullback that we saw in the market, because it just the impact that it had on employment. And in some ways, it was very different than the impacts that we've had in previous recessions. Like, if I think on a provincial basis, some of the previous recessions hit Edmonton harder than it hit us. Whereas this time, this was really the impact on Calgary's sort of downtown core.
And then 2018 was terrible. Why? Like, why was 2017 good? Did it make any sense, or was 2017 good? I think
good is a matter of perspective. So,
right.
We did start to see some improvements in 2017. Now, in part, that's because there's lots of people who were waiting for 2015 and 2016. We were in a full recession, so we saw a 2 consecutive year pullback in our economy. In 2017, all of a sudden, we were out of a recession, and people were, less concerned, and you had some of that pent up demand of people who didn't want to do anything until this thing was perceived to be over, and we saw some of that activity come back in 2017. But the challenge was, while there was some of that demand, it wasn't enough because we didn't really have growth in the same way. So, I mean, everyone said, well, we had a GDP growth of over 4%, but we just had a 2 consecutive year decline. It didn't really mean a lot on that aspect.
Right.
And plus, we never really saw the return of certain types of jobs. So we saw a bit of a boost, but it was not, people thought maybe that was the start to the turnaround. But I think the reality of just the economic conditions started to settle in, that wasn't necessarily the case. Now, in 2018, we had the added factor of you had a stress test come in. And the stress test combined with the fact that we haven't really had a change in our employment, right? So it's the combination of both. It's harder now to get into ownership, and you layer on the fact that we just haven't had that employment growth in really our traditional sectors. So we have had some employment growth, but it has been mostly in, areas that the salaries are far different than what we're used to in this city. So that's impacting our pricing and our recovery. And, one of the other challenges we had is, as prices started to look like they were improving, people started listing their homes as well. So there was many people who kind of held off as well. So that while there was a hold off on demand and people purchasing, there was also people who didn't necessarily have to sell right away either. And I think we kind of saw that start to shift because we saw those listings continue to rise. And
remind me, when did that stress test happen? Did it happen in January 1st, 2018? That was when it happened, isn't it? Yeah. That
was the broader base. Like, it was actually applied to anyone who, didn't have the 20% down. So the higher loan to value ratios, that actually occurred back in 2017. Okay. So some of those like first time buyers that didn't have enough equity down, they were already facing a stress test. But what happened in 2018 is that was broad based. That was applied to everyone. So that's what really was a change, and that was fairly significant because I think what we started to see is that, when that stress test came initially for people with higher loan to value ratios, you saw people coming up with more down, right? So they were trying to avoid that stress test by coming up with more for the down payment.
Okay.
And now there's no avoiding it regardless. So
right. And so at this point, so from January of 2018 to, end of 2018, our sales were lower and prices decreased. And the same thing has happened so far in 2019. Is that correct?
Right. Yeah, okay. That is correct. Yeah, we still have been struggling with just really too much supply in the market because demand just hasn't improved. And I mean, for demand to start to shift, so if we start to see that sales activity improve, you need to have a shift in either employment or migration. And I mean, while we've had some migration, most of them have been from international sources. So it takes a long time before that actually filters into housing demand. Whereas in the past, a lot of that migration was from other provinces. And what that does is that supports a quicker turnaround in terms of growth in housing demand. So what we've seen is some shifts that have happened in the market. And yet, for many reasons, supply had been quite high, and it is still quite high. Now we are starting to see some of that turn this year. So we're starting to see supply levels come off. We have seen some improvements in demand, but we have to keep in mind, like, it's still really low considering how large our city is, and relative to longer term averages. I mean, sales are nothing what they used to be. The real shift that has been coming has been purely driven by supply adjustments.
I see.
And where there has been demand growth has also changed. So where there is some improvements in sales is all been focused on the lower price ranges. Which again is very reflective of what we're seeing in the employment market. I mean, we're not seeing growth in those higher paid jobs. So it's not necessarily a surprise that you're not seeing improvements in the higher end of the housing market.
Yeah, makes sense. So, I mean, sort of moving forward from this time, well, actually, I'll preface that, as you know, because you work with, us salespeople and realtors every day. And, we're internal optimists to actually be in the business, the business we're in of, real estate sales. So how does, and I mean, as an economist, I don't know any economist jokes, but I mean, I wouldn't expect an economist would be typically an optimist. Or actually, can you comment on that? Like how and maybe as it relates to the, buyers and sellers, like, do you know what I'm? Do you understand my question?
Yeah, I do, and it's interesting because I don't really view myself as a pessimist or an optimist.
Yeah.
I actually put as more of a realist. But anyways,
right. Yes, I would think so. Yeah,
because and I think that part of it is when I think about market conditions. I mean, for me, if you're a buyer or a seller, there's always an advantage for one party or the other. So I actually don't look at market conditions really in the same way. When people say, "Are you optimistic?" It's like, well, on what lens are you looking at it from? I mean, if you're a buyer, I want to be buying as I did when the market's got too much supply. That's where you can, potentially see more value as a buyer when you're looking long term. Because I guess when it comes to housing, I mean, my ultimate thought is. Markets move up and down all the time. I mean, we've gone through boom and bust cycles. I think we've seen this. It really comes down to how long do you plan on being in Calgary for? So when you're making an investment decision on a home, and first of all, you got to live there. So, what type of lifestyle are you looking for? And then the next question always becomes, how long do you intend to be in this market? Like I look at it and go, yeah, likely my home value now. Hasn't appreciated much at all, that I'm certain of, but I don't necessarily care at this stage because I'm not selling today. Right. So I think when I look at optimism versus pessimism, I mean, this is the market conditions, but it's always your point of reference to tell you if you're optimistic or pessimistic, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. On that note, do you have any, I'm sure, for myself or maybe other people in the sales business, like, what should realtors be, how should realtors be assisting buyers and sellers in this current market? And more as a salesperson, actually. So how should we be using stats to assist our buyers and our sellers make good informed decisions in our Calgary real estate market?
Well, I think the first thing I would be doing is really understanding which part of the market are they interested in. So if you're dealing with a buyer, if they are in let's say the under 500, they want a detached home, well, that market isn't necessarily tight. That's a tighter market, and it's not going to be necessarily that price decline that they think that exists across the entire city. So I think it's really about using the stats to educate them that this market is highly dependent on where you're located, what property type you're dealing with, and what price range. If somebody is looking to buy in the upper end of the market and they can afford to, they're likely going to see some price declines, and they can probably have more negotiating power in the higher end of the market than they would at the lower end. So I think that is the one perspective for buyers. Now, on a seller's perspective, I mean, I think, I don't sell anything. So, but I don't, I'm not a salesperson.
So, really the boom bust economy of Calgary. And so how do you cope with it, Anne Marie, in your own life now? And then maybe, you've made some really great real estate decisions. Do you think you're smart or are you lucky? As an economist,
I hope it's because I'm smart, but I don't. There is a bit of both. I mean, I think when I look at my real estate decisions, part of it was also based off my lifestyle, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I wanted to make decisions that worked well for me and my family, and I had a different lens because I am not somebody who enters into real estate with a short time horizon. So I've always looked at real estate as a longer term investment, a longer period of time. I never purchased a home with the intent of, getting out of it in a couple of years. Right. So I think that in part has changed a bit of my outlook. I mean, even when we bought our first house, people thought we were crazy because, we spent more on the upper end of it at the time. And they're like, what are you doing? And again, our decision was, well, let's buy a house we don't have to move out of right away if we choose to have children and things like that. So we've always made our decisions based off of our lifestyle. Now, in terms of, and there is some luck. I mean, if I would have known that the market would have ran as much as it did, I would have bought 3 houses.
Right. Of course, yeah.
Right. So, I mean, in hindsight, yes, you look back and go, of course I could have done better, but, or I might have bought, more properties in different locations or made slightly different decisions on that aspect, but we were thinking about it more on a lifestyle choice. So.
Mm-hmm. Neat. In terms of your own friends, family, for example, myself personally, I was buying investment property in 2007 at the very peak of the boom and bought in certain districts of Calgary that, for example, paid $380,000 for a property in the southeast. That is today is worth maybe $280,000 to $310,000. 12 years later, and so and I've made some good decisions as well that have been fared much better. That's probably the worst. In terms of your own friends, family, and colleagues at work who, for example, purchased in 2014 and maybe are now going through a divorce. Like this is happening. I see it all the time, and have to sell. Right. For example, how does this affect your mindset? Like you grew up in Calgary, and so obviously your parents went through this in 1982 through the boom bust cycle. What do you do? And along with that, how do you save for a rainy day? I suppose you do, but
yes, I do.
As an economist working with 6,000 realtors who, for the most part are much like me in terms of their optimism and, their expressive nature, probably. Maybe you could just touch on that whole, friends, family that have, had unlucky decisions, really, what it comes down to, based on the time of buying.
Right. And I think, I think this is what some people don't do well. And this is, friends included. I've always been big on managing your risk, right? So ensuring that, for one, that if, let's say, you get into a property and somebody loses their job, I've always taken the approach, can I still afford this if I'm the only one working or if my husband's the only one working? So I've always been very cautious about managing that and making sure you save for a rainy day. Now, in terms of divorce, that's a difficult situation. All of a sudden, especially if you would have purchased in 2014 and there's not much value in your home, it's not necessarily that, you can just get out of it, right? And we have had friends in that situation and they have had to take certain losses, or choose to live with each other for a longer period of time, which isn't always an option, right? So unfortunately, those circumstances, I don't think anybody can plan for. I don't think you go into a marriage planning for divorce. So I think that's one of those things that it is unfortunate if you have to get out at certain times because of those market decisions, or because of lifestyle changes, impacting it, and you can't just wait it out on the market, and that does change things a bit. So we've known a few, and there's not much you can do about that. Unless you choose to stay married or, like I said, live together and figure out an arrangement. So.
Yeah. Will there be another boom in Calgary? Do you think?
I don't expect that to come anytime soon. The reality is, many of these struggles that we're having in the energy sector are not going away anytime soon. A lot, there's a lack of investment activity occurring. So we might be through a period of just slow activity.
Mm-hmm.
We might be going back to similar to what we saw in the 90s, where, I mean, it's not that our city's disappearing. It's not. I mean, we still have people who live here. There still is a core amount of business. But if you're not getting that growth from the energy sector, it's going to be pretty hard to go through another boom. So, unless some other industry comes in, right? So, I mean, that's where I always put some caveat. Unless we start to see some shift where there's growth in other industries and it is encouraging investment activity and we see our employment expanding in different ways, then it's just going to, I just don't see it on the horizon. I just don't, not over the near term.
Okay. Are you saying, is it like 2 years like before we see maybe a turn, or is it will you forecast something like that?
Well, I mean, obviously, I think when I see a turn, I do see a turn happening in terms of more stability in the market. So I am starting to see that because our supply levels are coming off, and assuming that nothing gets much worse, then we should start to see at least stability in the market. Now, in terms of recovery, that's going to take some time. And especially depending on the segment of the market you're dealing with. I mean, put some perspective, even on the condo side of the market. I mean, prices are over 13% below what they were in 2014. I mean, that recovery will take a significant amount of time, and it's going to come with if more people are moving here and typically people move here for jobs. We don't necessarily attract a lot of people just because, and often even, people have pointed to, well, is there opportunity from foreign investors? And I'd say, and for many foreign investors, their view on Calgary is their view on energy. So when they're looking at purchasing in Calgary, it is the expectation of, well, what is going to happen in energy? Now, that being said, when our closest larger city is Vancouver, and their prices are quite high and affordability might become a challenge, there could potentially be some opportunity for Calgary on that basis, just because of our relative affordability. But ultimately, we need jobs here. Like, we need more than that. So I think over the next couple of years, we'll start to see some stability. We might start to see some recovery happen, but it's a long time before we hit back to where we were in 2014. This is not an overnight thing. I mean, no one had expected a 2 consecutive year recession. And then really the slow growth coming out of it. I mean, I think even if we look at economic expectations for this year, basically it's no growth in the economy, and some people even have us pushing into a recession this year. So it just depends on which forecaster you look at. But that's just a sign of, the reality is we're not diversified. We're still highly reliant on the energy sector. And, we are struggling with both oil and natural gas, right? So it's just, there's been no shift in any of those aspects, right? And unless we diversify, and again, diversification takes time. That's not an overnight process either. So no magic bullet, I think, over the next couple of years. But at least if supply continues the way it's going, we should start to see more stability.
Very good. What stats should a buyer or a seller, or realtor, what are some of the key stats that we should all be looking at in making real estate decisions? I guess I'll let you go there.
Okay. I guess if I had to focus on a few just of the real estate stats, some of the key things that I always like to look at is really the relationship between sales and supply. So these are things, so I always talk about that month of inventory or month of supply number. The reason why I like that one is because it really shows me the relationship between how many actives are on the market, how many properties are currently for sale relative to what's selling. And if that ratio is really high, so if you're at like 7 months of supply, or if it's increasing versus decreasing, that tells me that prices are likely to move down. So I'm always watching that number to try and see what the impact is on pricing, because the higher the months of supply, the more you see downward pressure on prices. Now, that number has been starting to edge off, and I've been watching it. Now, there's some seasonality in the number, so I just apply some caution there. But that is the one thing that I do focus on to see because of the implication on pricing. Because ultimately, when most people are purchasing homes, it's the price that they're concerned about and general price trends. That's the number one influencer. Now, if I try and think of things as leading indicators that can influence that, things I also look for is just what's going on in the new home market. We have to think that the resale side, you're also competing with new homes. So if you've got a lot of supply choice in the new home market and the builders keep going with a lot more product, that's additional supply that's not necessarily captured in the resale side. So you have to be aware as well of what is happening on the new home side, especially in some of those areas, in the further parts of the city where there's new communities that are popping up, right? So if there's a lot of construction there, you got to be aware of what those prices are relative to the resale as well, because that can influence what happens on the resale market as well. Yeah. And employment. I also watch employment numbers too very closely, but that has an influence on sales. So when I think about employment, we do start to see that reflected in the sales numbers.
Okay, excellent. Well, thanks for sharing that. Two more sort of fun questions. Why or why not are you staying in Calgary?
Couple of reasons. One, I have family here. My kids love it here. I love raising my kids here. I'm happy with the school, so there's that part of it. And I don't really plan on going anywhere. I do love this city. It is home for me. It always has been. I think if I ever left, I'd have to be enticed by something pretty big for me to leave the city, but it'll always be my home. So I think there's just so much more to offer here. Like I said, the lifestyle to me in this city is exactly what I want. I like living on my acreage. I like having my space. The kids are happy with school, and I do find it relatively affordable compared to some of the other cities. So
perfect, wonderful, thank you. I moved here for my kids and the economy, and turns out my kids are adult kids in their early 20s, are out of the province and maybe back, but I'm staying for the mountains and the lifestyle and
that's fair.
Everything great about Calgary. Last question: what advice would you give your younger self?
I would say be prudent with your decisions. So don't if I were younger, I've made some good financial decisions. You have. It's hard. But I think the thing is to consider is, don't get in over your head, right? So make sure that you always have those options. And financially you can manage. I mean, I think I've always looked at things as, could I be financially sound on my own? And I've taken probably more risks when I was younger, which again, to me makes more sense. Like if you're going to take risks, you take them when you're younger versus when you're older, because when you're older, it's a lot harder to recover from that risk, right?
Absolutely.
So, but I think, I would just, tell myself to do the same thing that I kind of did. Just be prudent with your finances. Like be aware of, what type of lifestyle you want to live. Like, do you want to be all in on your house, or do you prefer to vacation? And I think that's kind of the stuff that I've always told myself is just, manage your budget, really.
Great.
And plan for uncertainty as best as you can. Yeah.
Great. Well, Anne Marie, I have always looked forward to your, anything that you do and your reports monthly that I see with the Calgary Real Estate Board. Thank you for your good work. I really appreciate you coming on our podcast. Anything else that you want to leave our listeners with, or actually, how should people follow you and maybe your forecasting?
Well, I do a lot of stuff with CREB on the monthly basis. I've also expanded on a provincial-wide basis. So I am working with our provincial association as well and doing, the same sort of monthly reports for the entire province. So you can see some regional differences. So how do they follow me? I have to admit, I am not a social media guru by any means. So it's kind of whatever CREB or area does for me. I'm not active in that aspect, but the reports that we do put out are all online. on Krebs.com or on Area as well.
Absolutely. And I'll include that in the show notes. Anne Marie, thank you so much for being my guest. I'll look forward to seeing you at the Krebs Forecast Breakfast in January.
Great. Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thanks much. Have a great day.
Thanks. You
Bye
too.
now. Bye-bye.
Bye.